Welcome to Driving Alpha, where we feature our friends, the outperforming investors who demonstrate their path to driving alpha or outsized investment returns. We're Alpha Partners, where we partner with 1,000 early-stage venture firms as their opportunity capital to invest in their best companies. Driving Alpha is supported by Affinity, provider of the CRM for the private capital relationship economy. Affinity knows who has the best relationship with the right startup. Affinity knows. Learn more at affinity.co/driving alpha.
Hi, this is Brian Smiga at Driving Alpha. I'm a partner at Alpha Partners. We are the Early VCs Growth Fund. We help early stage VCs capitalize on their best companies at Series B and later rounds. And as a true partner, we share the carry. With me today is one of our earliest relationships in the VC world and a real pioneer in tech, Eric Benhamou of Benhamou Global Ventures. Welcome, Eric.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, I hope the audience won't hold it against this, but I think I met you in person back at the launch of Palm, US Robotics, it was then called, and I was a leading Palm developer. It didn't make me a lot of money, but it was a ton of fun pioneering on PDAs and mobile computing in those days.
Yeah, this brings us back a generation.
It does. But you were a fantastic CEO at 3Com. And from what I read, you expanded revenue 25-fold and brought it on to the Fortune 500. And so you must have learned some lessons in that enterprise CEO role that you must be applying today as you invest in companies you call Enterprise 5.0. So could you unpack that term for us and then get into maybe how what you learned 20 years ago is evolved and you apply it today in your playbook to get alpha?
Well, Enterprise 5.0 is a phrase that we coined at BGV to designate with a shorthand a new generation of companies which are really focused on transforming the enterprise, using AI as a transformative ingredient, and to deliver complete solutions. Most of these solutions are aligned with a particular vertical industry that's appropriate to transform. A few are focused on transforming a function within an enterprise. Mm-hmm. But the important thing is that, first of all, AI is not just a veneer. This is something which is absolutely essential, a core ingredient of the solution. And the second is the word solution. In other words, solution as opposed to a component. There are some very good venture firms who will fund the best-in-class component of a solution. We don't particularly like that. We prefer to back companies who will sell a complete solution that can deliver transformative, tangible outcomes within an enterprise. This is the overall thesis of the firm and certainly the last couple of funds that we raised. And obviously 5.0 combines all flavors of AI, the discriminative AI of the 1910 to 15, 16, and the transformative AI, transformer-based AI, generative AI that we're more familiar with these days.
So Enterprise 4.0 to 5.0, can you just kind of unpack that for the layperson on the call?
The big change between 4.0 and 5.0 is the arrival of generative AI and with all the attendant consequences that it brought about. And the important idea that these AI solutions are there to augment the human capabilities. So the human is very much involved in these solutions, and these solutions expand the human reach, impact, and so on, free the human from tedious tasks and enable the human to perform more strategic tasks. That's the whole idea behind 5.0. If we go back to 4.0, 4.0 was about using AI to detect interesting patterns, for example, machine vision in different industries. And this was extremely transformative as well, but not to the same impact as 5.0, which includes also generative AI.
That's fantastic. And thank you. So clear. And perhaps you could cite one company and its full solution in which AI plays an essential role. And so it's not a component, it's truly an essential ingredient in a full solution.
I'll give the example of a company that where I happen to have led the investments for BGV, and I'm also active on the board of that company. The company is called Evinced. Evinced focuses on a very specific problem that application developers have, which is the problem of accessibility. Accessibility is something that we understand typically in the context of let's say a building has to be accessible. It has to have an on-site ramp for people on wheelchairs. But in the digital world, you also have to have accessibility to ensure that, for example, users who are visually impaired are able to navigate through a screen using the tab interface. You have to make sure that every field in your interface is accessible by people who are visually impaired. And this is true of web applications as well as mobile applications. This is not just a nice to have. This is a must have, because if you don't, you'll be more than slapped on the wrist. You'll be fined 6 or 7 figure fine. So all banks, insurance companies, consumer facing companies with large applications must pay very close attention to this. And it's a problem which is more and more expensive to solve without AI, because you tend to generate more and more frequent versions of your applications. And if you have to test every single version for accessibility every time, you'll burn an enormous amount of human capital testing for accessibility. So what Evinced has done, he has figured out not only ways to detect your accessibility flaws in your interface, but also ways to fix it and fix it automatically. So the first piece of it is very helpful to the compliance teams who, before releasing an application, have to detect these problems. And the second piece of it, which is fixing the problem, is very helpful to the development teams that have to fix this. And in fact, if they use the tools early on, they don't even have to fix it. The tool will ensure that you don't make accessibility mistakes. So Evinced combines all of these tools into a platform for accessibility. And because of their unique architecture and morals, and because they were born at the same time as Gen AI, basically, they've been able to take advantage of these latest advances, and they've performed extremely well in the market.
Well, that sounds essential for so many regulated and large industries. I suppose they're the leader and the first to be able to do the accessibility work for the enterprises. Is that right?
Yes, they are. And they've received a lot of accolades, but also they have a leading share, and they're enjoying a very rapid rate of growth. So
amazing.
That's a very typical example of Enterprise 5.2 companies. And this one happens to focus on a specific function within an enterprise. I could have given you other examples that are more vertically oriented, but that gives you a sense of why we're excited about 5.2 companies.
Now, coming back to your experience as a Fortune 500 CEO of 3Com, a tech company, in your mentoring and coaching of these companies, I suppose you can bring real experience on the whole buying journey, the whole selling journey of solutions like the one we just mentioned. Can you tease out some of the things that you feel are your secret playbook for coaching companies on selling into enterprise?
Sure. In general, the majority of our portfolio companies tend to sell directly to enterprises, but this is not their only sales motion. But if you sell directly to the enterprise at a strategic level, it is very important that you convey not just the value of the product today, but also the value of your vision and your roadmap and your ability to become a strategic partner over time. So there's a strategic discussion that you have to unlock. And this is the key to building a lasting relationship, which creates the kind of returns that you expect from enterprise selling. So I will always encourage my portfolio companies to focus beyond the product of today, but to be able to have a conversation about not just resolving the product today, but start figuring out what might be around the corner downstream, and why the company will become not only relevant, but even more strategically important. And this is what enables you to elevate the conversation to a very senior level within the enterprise IT organization. So this is something which I always try to get our founders to make room for. I know that in general, founders have to live in the moment, and they have to make sure that they bring the business of today so that they get to survive another quarter, but they have to keep in mind the long-term road and the roadmap that leads to it.
That's great. And so I think it's a consultative sale where the founder and his team come in as experts, say, about accessibility and what's happening next and what's in their roadmap. It's great. Another aspect of your fund is that it's global, truly global. Perhaps 60% or more of your capital is deployed outside of Silicon Valley, where you are in Menlo Park. I've been to your beautiful office. And I wonder if you have a thesis about that. Is there an edge? Is there a way of driving returns by having the majority of your capital outside of Silicon Valley?
Yes, it didn't happen by accident. It happened probably because we had experienced what it's like to be a cross-border founder. Most of the members of my team have a similar experience to mine. So I've come to Silicon Valley about 50 years as a graduate student, and I had an extra level of motivation to prove myself worthy of the opportunity given to me to go to grad school in a place like Stanford. And I believe that this extra degree of motivation, this chip on my shoulders, so to speak, is something that you'll find with most immigrant entrepreneurs. They have an extra level of grit, which I think is essential when you build a company. But in addition to this, particularly in the age of AI, you have this very interesting dichotomy where the biggest market in the world remains in the US. But so you have a concentration in terms of deployment and market sizes, but you have a broad geographic distribution of talent. So you can find top level talent, not just in Silicon Valley, not just in the US, but many other geographies in the world. And you find this talent at a small fraction of the cost that you pay here in Silicon Valley. So you have a labor arbitrage for top AI talents that has never been as pronounced. It follows from this that the best way to take advantage of this situation is to construct your companies in a way where you have a talent recruitment advantage in your country of origin, your region of origin, and you have all of your market-facing resources close to your biggest market in the US. And in so doing, you're creating a cross-border company with most of your R&D in a place where you come from, where you could build a strong team at a low cost. And you have all of your market-facing resources in the US. For all practical purposes, you look like a US company, but you have a cost advantage and a sustainable cost advantage. So that's basically the underpinning of a cross-border rationale. Now, to take advantage of it, you have to viscerally understand how this works. And you have to have feet on the ground in these different places where entrepreneurs may come up and raise capital. So with this in mind, we do have an office in Israel. We have an office in Paris. We have an incubator in Bangalore. And in the future, we expect to have a presence in Japan as well. So this defines the major cross-border corridors where we feel we can make a contribution.
That's great. And I see in the U.S. The rise of emerging managers that focus exclusively on immigrants, funds like One Way and Unshackled. You may know of others. And I think this thesis around, well, first of all, for an immigrant to even get a chance to go to graduate school in Stanford, there was a high bar. So there's a positive selection bias. And then there is that grit, that failure is not an option, that determination that I think gets added to it. It's amazing. And your life is certainly an exemplar of that. Thanks for sharing. I wonder if you have a sense of where the heat map is. I mean, you're in Paris, Tel Aviv, Bangalore, and soon to be Japan. What makes for that? Why those locations? And what's the heat map of those locations?
Israel basically is also known as a startup nation. They invented the cross-border model by necessity because they had no domestic market or of enough size to be able to build a business. So from the get-go, founders in Israel are focused on markets like the US, possibly Europe, but mostly the US. So they have to figure out a way to make it work as a cross-border structure. I think this model was pioneered in the 90s and it was successful. And then it was imitated by other countries who perhaps have other opportunities. If you're an entrepreneur coming out of Europe, you probably have a decent domestic market size. So it's tempting to just limit yourself to that. But if you just do that, then it becomes much more difficult to think about the US market later on because you're just too comfortable staying in Europe. And as you know, Brian, if a company does not address a big enough market, it will not generate the kind of VC returns that we expect. So basically, that's how the model evolved. And I think today, because of the combination of evolution of the mindsets, the entrepreneurial meme having spread over the world, and the fact that tools have made it much more possible to collaborate across long distances, it makes it much more practical to do that. This doesn't mean that everybody can become a cross-border entrepreneur or cross-border investor. There's a lot of practical knowledge that you have to have in order to be for example, for us to be a good investor. When an entrepreneur coming from 5,000 miles away tells us, I'm thinking about coming to the US and starting to building up a sales team, they don't know the first questions to ask. They don't know where to go, what kind of people to recruit. They don't know the pace at which they should recruit. They don't know even the practical things about relocating themselves, their families, schooling for the kids. All of these things have to be resolved in a very short amount of time. Having been through this so many times before, I think we're in a better position to help these entrepreneurs and other firms. So this becomes a specialty.
So we all know about Israel Startup Nation and to a degree, Bangalore. In fact, Alpha is starting Alpha Israel Fund. And because it represents a great and rich, fertile market to be a growth capital investor for the early stage funds, we're really, really excited about it. And I think you're going to meet our partner there later this month. But tell us quickly about Paris and Japan. I know they're very important, but my knowledge is limited, and I bet that's true for the audience. Unpack that a bit for us.
Yeah, so Paris, of course, I went to undergrad in Paris. So, of course, I knew the place a little bit better. And I think there has been a transformation of the French ecosystem for entrepreneurs over the last 20 years. Interestingly, the word entrepreneur is French originally, but up until 20 years ago, it didn't mean much in France. But the venture capital started to really become a factor in France. Capital formation started to accelerate about 20 years ago. Some of it was accelerated by the Banque Publique d'Investissement, BPI, which is basically the sovereign wealth fund of France that helped bootstrap a lot of funds there. So it became much more possible to create companies in France. There were some structural reforms that made it more possible. And what's even more relevant to our conversation today, France has always had a very good mathematical tradition. So they teach math very well. I was good at math, not because I was a great student, but because I had great teachers in my undergrad, and it made me realize that there is a lot of mathematical talents and therefore AI talent today available. And this is why, for example, across Europe, the only company that has competitive frontier models is Mistral of France, Paris. So there was a reason for France to be known for a quality country for entrepreneurship and particularly AI company creation. Japan, it's a little harder to explain. You probably noticed that for the first 20 years in the 21st century, Japan was absent from the innovation scene. Somehow they had vacated this role. China was much more present. China sort of withdrew because of geopolitical tensions between China and the US. It started to withdraw about 5-6 years ago, leaving a vacuum behind, which Japan has attempted to fill. Combination of this plus Shinzo Abe being a more enlightened, forward-looking prime minister helped to sensitize Japanese companies to the need for entrepreneurship and need for innovation, and to break out of the traditional Kairitsu model. So what we found is an extraordinary amount of interest on the part of entrepreneurs and big companies for Silicon Valley type innovation. And I could not have said that 10 years ago, probably not even 5 years ago, but just beginning about that time, right around COVID time, we sensed that Japan was on the verge of breaking out. We sensed it based on a number of things. For example, frequent visits from academics and entrepreneurs here in the Valley. The fact that major research universities were collaborating with places in the US on AI advances. The fact that more and more corporates in Japan attempted to become LPs and create CVCs with LP positions in US funds. All of this happening together, it started to create a valuable ecosystem. And we took notice and realized that 2 funds ago, Japanese LPs represented less than 5% of our capital. Last fund, it was like 10-12%, and this fund's going to be more than 20%.
Amazing. And what a great insight. And I think you're probably a first mover in working so closely with Japanese entrepreneurs. And who knew that is a French, right? And so we've been saying entrepreneurs like mad around the globe and online, but I don't think most people understand the etymology of the word being French. That's fantastic. It means to make something, to be a maker, to do something. Amazing. So top of this global effort where you find this talent arbitrage and this cross-border investing, even as a relatively modest-sized funds, you've kept your funds small so you can be nimble and really pursue your art, your craft in choosing and building companies. You've layered on a network. And I think this whole area of smart networks and expert networks is going to explode with the addition of AI. The sea change that has happened in so many ways to distribute resources around the world for people to remain local while addressing larger markets. So how do you play that game? Because I think you play it very well, but very quietly and very successfully. Can you share your playbook for building a network, whether it's of CTOs or of another vertical function in enterprise? And how do you attract and keep those folks interested in your companies and in your work?
Our advisors play a vital role in our success. And I have to say that given our investment style, which is very active, it makes sense to have advisors, because for us to be able to be good advisors to our companies, we have to have good advisors ourselves. We didn't come to venture capital from business school. We came to venture capital from a long career as operating executives. And you mentioned some of the work that I did before, leading 3Com, Palm, other companies. All of my partners have a similar mix of background, first being operators and later being entrepreneurs, being investors. And so as a result of this, we built a lot of relationships in our operating careers, which we're leveraging as investors by bringing these advisors to interesting discussions. And it falls into three groups. We have highly technical advisors who basically have had successful careers as chief technology officers or chief information officers or chief information security officers. And we leverage these people to really understand and test the product strategy and roadmaps of our portfolio companies. Then we have more sales and marketing and business-oriented advisors who are there to basically improve the go-to-markets and the positioning of our portfolio companies, the pricing strategy, the way they compete, and so on. That's the second group. And the third group, which is more recent, is we felt we needed to have an AI advisory group, people who are completely steeped in the world of AI, who live in these prominent AI companies and who understand what the state of the art is, and who are keeping track of the advances in a very, very fast-moving field. So these three groups have three different roles in our decision-making process, in our coaching process. And oftentimes we will have sessions where we bring a portfolio company in front of our technology advisory circle, for example, and we tell them this is going to be sometimes uncomfortable, but fundamentally a friendly environment. For 2 hours, you're going to talk about your plans, and you can talk in full confidence. You're going to be questioned, you're going to be pushed back, but you will learn more in these 2 hours than the last 4 board meetings that you had with your board, because these people have deep domain knowledge, and they will not hesitate to call you when they think that you're making a big mistake. And after that, you'll figure out which advice you want to take, which advice you don't want to take. So the trick is that for these people to remain engaged, for these various advisors to remain engaged, they have to get something in return. In most cases, what they get in return is the opportunity to engage with leading edge founders and to remain connected to the state of the art of innovation. These are extremely stimulating conversations. There's no bureaucratic bullshit that you get right into the meat of the matter. And they like that. They also enjoy sometimes the banter back and forth between themselves. There's a little bit of competition between them too. But this is what makes the ingredient of a really good, stimulating conversation. This is good enough motivation for the most part. But in addition to this, in the course of these conversations, they'll start to really connect with some of these portfolio companies. So much so that the CEO of those companies will want to retain them as advisors. And they'll have a side conversation after the meeting and say, well, I really liked your remarks. And by the way, how would you like to be a formal advisor to our company and continue to follow us for the next couple of years? We'll reward you with equity in our company, and maybe even some cash, but you'll have a sustained relationship with the company, not just the one shots. And this happens quite often. And then there's a small group of advisors who perhaps don't go as deep in any one company, but who do spend the time with us. So these ones, we will pay a modest stipend, and we'll give them a little piece of carry across our funds. So they'll have a financial incentive to help us be successful. They'll share in the success. So the combination of these various tools enable us to create the alignment that we need between these advisors and ourselves. And this enables us to compete as a venture firm because our founders will appreciate that we can activate this ecosystem on their behalf. And that will bring much more than just the capital to bear, that will have also this know-how, this knowledge, this advice. And this is sustained. This is not just a one shot or one meeting. This is over the life of engagement for those companies.
Amazing. So if I had an AI expert and I thought that I should introduce him to you to be in your group, how often might he or she be meeting with the companies? And for how long? Like, I guess you said 2-hour sessions. Maybe is it once a month, 6 times a year?
I would say it's 6 times a year. Every other month is the natural cadence. So it's enough that even if they have a day job, they can absorb that in their workload. They'll make time for it. So it's not a huge time imposition. And it enriches their own lives, their own professional lives. It works both ways.
So I think that's a good note to end on. I just really appreciate how you're this quiet convener of experts for your companies. And you've built almost a family to help the companies. And there's so much in it for them. And it's just really a center of excellence that you pursue at Benhamou Global Ventures. So thanks for sharing that. I'm sure many of the VC funds that listen to this podcast will want to borrow that playbook. So Eric, we'll sign off here. Thanks so much. It was really great spending time with you.
Thanks for listening to the Driving Alpha podcast, where we host top investors to demonstrate how they outperform the market. Click subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Driving Alpha is supported by Affinity, provider of the CRM for the private capital relationship economy. Affinity knows who has the best relationship with the right startup. Affinity knows. Learn more at affinity.co/driving alpha.